Oh, yeah. Here we go. There ain't no stopping them. It's the news from two dudes with attitude. Now, here they are, your hosts, Mr. Bruce and the Reverend Rob Lee. All right, more editing on the, we tried to change it. I tried to clean it up a little bit, and the intros, I think I might just go back to the ones with the profanity. I don't know. We'll see. But hello, everybody, and welcome to News, Dudes and Tudes with your hosts, Mr. Bruce and the Reverend Rob. How you doing, sir? What's up?
Doing good, sir. How about yourself, man?
Good, good, good. People are going to see me fade in and out tonight. I'm not in my studio. Bruce, where am I sitting?
You were sitting in my living room right now, Rob.
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding, no kidding. And as usual, whenever Mr. Bruce and I get together, topics come up. And some of the most interesting and most recent, they are as usual. So we're going to do something a little different, see what's happening, see what's going on. Good evening, everybody. Kevin, good to see you. And welcome to News, Dudes and Tudes. And we got a special guest tonight. And due to the whole Roe versus Wade thing, we're not going to get into certain areas of this, but there are going to be parts. I got questions about the legal aspects of some things that are going on. So who better than to get an attorney? So Bruce, take it from there.
I want to go and bring him in.
Okay.
I want to introduce Mr. Andrew Darling to you. He is well known in the community. He is at AndrewDarlingLaw.com. He ran for sheriff last time. He was coaching the Oak Ridge football team for a little while, very active in the community. Super, super nice guy. I've met him several times. We have debated online about lots of issues. And I consider him to be, if we actually were face-to-face, I would consider him to be a friend. Mr. Darling, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me. I really appreciate it.
You are welcome, and it's nice to meet you. Thank you for taking time out of your evening to be here and help. You know, I'll be the illiterate one. Bruce is a lot more up to date on a lot of this stuff. So there's some questions I have and I know or whatnot, but we're going to let Bruce kick this off and, say hi to everybody. Welcome. Another, edition of News, Dudes and Tudes off of Dynamic Life Pespective. So we're going to be seeing and, and we'll be talking a little bit about travel later. So we want to stay pretty well close to the chest on our questions here, but then later we'll see if you want to stick around or not. Then Bruce and I are going to have a Bruce and Rob conversation. So you can subject yourself to that or no,
I really want to go ahead and thank him for taking time out of his schedule. He just had his baby just came home today.
Wow, yeah, so, your baby.
Yes, our my wife and I's third baby, our second baby girl, was born on Sunday, and mom and baby came home. Everybody's happy and healthy, and it's an amazing feeling. It's my oldest is 20, our middle child is 11, and we have a newborn. So we got a couple gaps in there.
Wow, so, that's I'm in that same boat. But congratulations! I remember the feeling. I have 3 within 2 years of each other, from 40 down to about 36. Yeah. And then my youngest is at 26. So I get it. So, but it's nice they all love each other. But congratulations, brother. Glad.
Congratulations, sir. And even more so, thank you for taking time out of everything going on to spend time with us. Your time is about to be really, really, really precious and limited. So we appreciate what you're giving to us and the community, man. This is huge for you. So I know you didn't want to do this at first, but the topic was really, really close to your heart. So I want to thank you again for coming on and spending time with us.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. I appreciate the opportunity. The last, couple weeks of Supreme Court opinions have been probably the most substantive change in several areas of law in, I would argue, probably the last 20 years.
I agree. Help me. I think I know, and I think that most people believe that this starts and stops with the life of a fetus. And I don't want to go ahead and get into that, but I believe that this decision has ramifications and has a ripple effect for a whole lot more. And I did a cursory reading of Justice Thomas's statement. And from what I read, I am alerted by it. I mean, I am majorly concerned by it. But I have a layman's perspective. Rob has a working perspective of it. You are an expert. And this has a whole lot to do with everything from a woman's right to have sex, how she rears her child, women's rights. And then his statement had said this may actually impact, it's got potential to impact women's rights, civil rights, blacks in America, marriage rights, and possibly even interracial marriages, and a whole lot of those things. And I don't want to go and be like, the sky is falling, but am I overly concerned here? Am I reading too much into this? Qualify me, sir.
So what I would say, the rights that you're talking about are what are generally referred to as substantive due process rights. Going back all the way to Griswold, which came out in the 60s, I think it's 65. I'll know here in a minute when I relook at the opinion again to read a couple things I've highlighted, or at least the concurring opinion from Justice Thomas. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about the woman's right to contraception. There's a 2003 case, Lawrence v. Texas, where it was two gentlemen were having relations in their house. They were arrested under Texas sodomy laws. And I mean, this arrest took place in 1998. So like, we're not talking about a long time ago for some of these rights. And then of course, Obergefell in 2015, which legalized same-sex marriage throughout the nation. One thing that Justice Thomas conveniently didn't mention is Loving versus Virginia, yes, which impacts him directly as he's in an interracial marriage. It impacts me directly as my wife is an active duty service member. She is a first-generation immigrant from Ghana. She is an American citizen, but she happens to be Black, right? So like these are very important rights that the foundation on which the court overturned is that abortion rights in this country are there. They don't fall into the long history and tradition of this nation, which is a huge, I would argue that is the fatal flaw with what some of you may have heard of as originalism. So what originalism means, and it's a judicial philosophy, that when interpreting the law, we have to interpret it as the founders would have interpreted it when they drafted the Constitution. And the problem with that is when they drafted the Constitution, unless you were a land-owning white male, you weren't considered equal at all. So the entire foundation of that way of thinking is fundamentally flawed, and allowing the states to take over the decisions related to their laws about abortion we're sending back the right to states that have historically abused people who are not powerful, to include women, to include African Americans, to include immigrants, to include all sorts of folks that historically have not been protected, which is the reason that Roe v. Wade was originally instituted, was to provide access to something that the states could not get right.
So, and you know what I find very interesting about that in what you said, the whole idea, okay, of going back and changing things, I don't think people understand it when we talk about substantive, and I love the way you explained it, but it was Thomas Jefferson himself who said we're to challenge this document all the time. We're to challenge our government. And I don't think anybody, and this is personal opinion, that wrote the Constitution meant for us to keep it unchanged, thus amendments, because life changes, things change, things happen. So in all that, my question to you is, so, does that bring into the fact that somebody could now challenge something that was ruled as substantive, and now they could have a vote to say that's not substantive and take things away?
So that is the premise of the opinion, is that Roe was wrongly decided from the moment it was decided. And it was wrongly decided because there was no history and tradition of abortion being a fundamental right, as it's obviously not listed anywhere in the Constitution.
Okay.
And that's sort of the basis for overturning it. And the majority makes what I find just be a repulsive comparison to Plessy v. Ferguson, which is a case about a black man who I believe was actually only like 1/4 or 1/8 black. He was what we would call today white passing, right? So like if you looked at him, if you Google and look at a picture of Robert Plessy, he looks like a white guy. But he was counted back then under the, 1 drop rule. And if you have a drop of African-American blood or a drop of being black, you are black. So if you actually look at a picture, it sort of takes a different perspective on the case. But the court refers to that as saying it was wrongly decided from the day it was decided. And that's why Brown v. Board of Education overturned it. And if we have a decision that was wrongly decided the moment it was decided, we are obligated to overturn it. And it's like, but generally, like Plessy, there weren't cases after Plessy that reaffirmed Plessy and said, oh yeah, this is great, separate but equal. Of course, this makes perfect sense. Let's keep doing that. But with Roe, you have Casey, which actually the majority makes a really good point that Casey changed from sort of that trimester viability test that we know from Roe, where sort of the interest of the woman and the state's interest in the viability of a pregnancy, that's sort of the test. Like based on the different trimesters, where you are in the trimester is going to determine, used to determine when the woman was able to have an abortion or not. As further on in the pregnancy, the greater the state interest in the fetal life became. So the Casey, which sort of adjusted Roe, if you will, sort of changed it to an undue burden test. An undue burden was what's that?
So
yeah,
Casey qualified Roe.
Yeah, so Roe was the first case, and then when Casey came out, Casey changed it to what's called an undue burden test, which is essentially, is the state putting an undue burden on the woman who is trying to get an abortion? And different things like that are sort of, you hear in certain states where there's, from when you go into your first appointment at an abortion provider, you have 48 hours, you have to come back before they can actually perform the procedure. Or you have to go meet with a doctor. That doctor has to have admitting privileges to some hospital, even though generally an abortion is not an in-hospital procedure. So there's a lot of things that states have done that, I mean, I believe West Virginia had one abortion clinic in the state of West Virginia that recently closed down because of Dobbs being overturning Roe. So the workability of an undue burden test is something that the majority in Dobbs really focuses on as to, well, it's completely unworkable. Like, how do you have an undue burden? What's an undue burden? What have we been even talking about? Right? So they say that it's caused so many issues in the lower courts that they're just going to give it back to the states and let the states do what they will, because we know how states always act in good faith is almost what the majority is saying in the opinion.
So what I think I hear you saying is that by giving the auspices for Roe v. Wade back to the states, this opens up any other case that this was used as a platform for to now be reopened and questioned.
Yes. So here's what I'm gonna actually read from the opinion. This is from Justice Thomas's concurring opinion. So Justice Thomas says, well, part of the majority opinion talks about the courts are only deciding abortion because abortion is fundamentally different as it relates to the state's interest in fetal life, in unborn life. It's And they're very intentional with their words about what they are calling. They're calling it fetal life, even though throughout the pregnancy, it doesn't actually become a fetus until a certain point. Right? So like that's medical. That's not a legal opinion. That's a medical opinion. So it's one of those things. Here's what Justice Thomas writes. He says, the court today declines to disturb substantive due process jurisprudence generally or in the doctrine's application in other specific contexts. Okay? So what he says is cases like Griswold v. Connecticut, which is about contraceptives, Lawrence v. Texas, which is about having consensual sex with a member of the same sex. So essentially having members of the LGBTQ community having sex, private consensual sex. And then Obergefell, which is, of course, the right to same-sex marriage, are not at issue. That's what he's saying. And then he comes in the very next paragraph, which he's basically saying what the majority has said prior to his concurrence. For that reason, in future cases, we should reconsider all of the court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell, because any substantive due process decision is demonstrably erroneous. And here's the funny part. He quotes himself in other opinions like 4 times. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like there's a level of sort of respect for the pompous in that. But
respect for the pompous.
Yeah, like I mean, he quotes himself in when he concurs in judgment in Ramos v. Louisiana. He cites himself when he concurs in Gamble v. U.S. in 2019. And then further down, he cites himself in an opinion and in a dissenting opinion. And it's just like you've been on the court way too long at this point. Like, what are you doing?
Now,
way too long. Hey, everybody, welcome to News, Dudes and Tudes. We're talking about the Roe v. Wade. We're getting into the sidebar stuff that you're not going to hear about, other ramifications, things like that, with our special guest, attorney Andrew Darling. So, and Mr. Bruce is here, so we're kicking this off. Make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, ring the little bell to make sure you get notifications whenever we're coming back on. So, now that the little advertisement's over.
Now,
all right, you had talked about this, even like the sodomy laws can now be, some of them can be overturned, reinstated, whatever. Okay.
Well, let me say this really quickly.
What's that?
Really quickly. There are laws on the books in certain states that are called zombie laws. So Michigan has a full criminalization of abortion law that's always been on the books, but Roe made it invalid. So now that Roe is overturned, that law is technically back in effect. So that's a full criminalization, not just you don't have a substantive due process right to get an abortion, but should you attempt to get one, you can be criminalized. Like there are laws in multiple states that have automatically come back on the books. There are also what are called trigger laws in certain states, mostly throughout the South and the Midwest, that in the event Roe was overturned, these laws come into effect.
And so and that was going to be my question. And I spent you don't know, you and I just met, but I spent 14 years of my life starting in the early 80s as a law enforcement officer. Mm-hmm. And everybody used to talk about the sodomy law. And I'm like, when somebody runs in and says, I was sodomized, I'm not looking at that act. I'm looking at whether it was a rape, a sexual assault, was the whole thing. We're taking it on as a whole different proponent. But a lot of people, I don't think, understand it makes a lot of these sodomy laws, because we used to laugh, makes it illegal for a husband and wife, all white, all black, I don't care, to perform anal sex.
Mm-hmm.
So who's reporting this? How are they investigating it? And it just gets into the whole BS. So with that being said, does this then put into jeopardy rights of, like you said, you're in a biracial marriage. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the politically correct term for it now or what,
Maybe
but
interracial, but yeah, I understand what you mean. Yeah, we have biracial children.
okay, there we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
You would think as a master's of social work I would get that right, but I'm old as dirt. You know, so does that put then these like the LGBTQ rights, the rights of couples to be married back into question?
It absolutely does. And even in his, so here's the scary part is normally courts, I'll say this, normally the Supreme Court expressly says, we're only doing this. We're only doing this. Parentheses, we're not talking about these 5 things.
Right.
But those 5 things are the next things to go. Like
yeah, so we'll take them next month.
Yeah.
When this first broke in like March or April, whenever it was.
Yeah, I think Politico got it in February.
Okay.
An original draft opinion.
Kavanaugh, put out a statement saying that this is only about Roe versus Wade and it doesn't have to do with anything else. Then when the ruling came out, Thomas's put out the majority court's opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And
so it was, he put out a concurrence to the opinion. So let me do this because this can be confusing sometimes for people. So on the Supreme Court, when there are 9 justices, there have been times in history where we had more. There are times we've had less. When there is, generally you need a majority. So obviously if it's an odd number, you need +1. If you get that, you have a majority, even if it's 5-4, and usually the chief judge picks somebody who is on the winning side to write the majority opinion for the court. If a judge, there are a lot of times where you have a concurrence. Concurrences are generally, yes, I agree with the outcome. Here are some other things I would have done if I was writing for the entire majority. Here are some other things I would have taken a look at. You can also have a concurrence where the person says, I agree with the outcome. Here's a whole separate legal doctrine or reason why I would have come to that conclusion.
Right.
And then you have the dissent, which can be any number of people. It can be 1, it can be all 4, it can be whomever. In a 7-2 decision, it can be the 2 people that are writing a dissent. And they're saying, we believe this is wrong based on this other legal principle, this other way of thinking, this other justification. We believe it's wrong, therefore we dissent. There have been cases previously, and I can't remember the famous one right now, where there were only pluralities. So there were 4 justices that agreed on a certain thing. There was a 5th justice who agreed with them in the outcome only, but not the rationalization for how they got to the outcome. And there were 4 justices who dissented. So there was no majority law. The outcome was found by a majority, but it was not a majority outcome on any sort of law that they could codify and give clear guidance to the states because they only had 4 people that agreed on the basis for the conclusion. So in this instance, I believe it was Justice Alito that wrote the opinion itself, that was signed onto by the other conservative members of the court. Okay. And there's a lot of history in here too, as far as like the what the history related to what states had, what sort of abortion policies in place prior to Roe, what states have done to either make it more complicated, make it easier. There's a lot of different things that states have done. And I'm just trying to get to the part where it talks about, I'm pretty sure it was Justice Alito that wrote the majority opinion, joined by Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Gorsuch, Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Thomas, Alito, of course, and Judge Coney Barrett. So that's the 6, and then Judge Kagan, Judge Sotomayor, and Justice Breyer were in the dissent. And Justice Breyer is the justice that is at the end of is now retiring, and soon to be Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is taking his place.
Okay.
So the timeline is, I'm trying to get the point that there was one point where Kavanaugh Alito, I think, they had said this is nothing but this case.
Mhm.
And then the timeline after that, Thomas said, well, it's this case, but this case becomes a precedent for all these other cases.
Mhm.
And Kavanaugh and Alito did not, or Scalia, did not go ahead and say, well, wait, this is just this case only. They said it, but then when Thomas went off the rails, they kind of let him go off the rails. Now, like I said, layman's opinion, that's kind of what I think I'm seeing. Is that pretty much right, or is there, or what am I missing here?
So Justice Thomas has, for a long time, he is the senior justice right now, has been the most conservative member of the court. He has for a long time. I mean, people talk about Justice Scalia, who passed away in, I believe it was 2016. Justice Scalia was one of the, I would argue, probably one of the best or more engaging writers that the Supreme Court has ever seen. And he gets a lot of credit for sort of the conservative legal movement, originalism, and going back to a way of thinking about the law that had previously fallen out of favor. But Justice Thomas has been this conservative stalwart for decades. And he has been the one that has been shifting the court in that direction to the best of his ability this entire time. Like, he genuinely believes that there are no such thing as substantive due process rights. And he said as much in his concurrence.
Right.
Like, he is also one who has written in dissents regarding what are some people call faithless electors, some people call them independent electors. It's essentially saying that the electors that states have that are the ones that vote for their electoral college number, right? For however many electoral college votes you get, those electors don't have to even look at the popular vote for their state. They can vote for whatever they want.
Right.
And go against the will of the people of their state. He supported that theory way before 2020 and 2016 and any time before that people have actually been educated a little bit about it. And he is doing everything that he can now that they have a 6-3 majority. They're not being incremental at all. I mean, the last 2 weeks, okay, we've gotten a case that does the exact opposite of what Roe does related to handguns. It completely invalidates New York's law, and I believe it's 6 other states. I believe it was 7 states where you have to have something other than just, hey, I want to carry a firearm, a concealed carry permit, basically. And you need something else, some special need. I need, need it for self-defense for this reason, right? Like, I have an ATM business, I have a cash business, and I always have cash on me. Okay, that makes sense. Concealed carry, go ahead. They take away the shall types of laws. You shall have some other reason other than just you want a concealed carry permit. Now, all the states that have a may provision, like Florida has a may provision, you may have a concealed carry permit. You have to meet these requirements. But there's not like an extra, like, I don't have to say I want a concealed carry permit in the state of Florida because I have some additional risk, right? I'm a criminal defense attorney. Yeah. Sometimes I go to neighborhoods that a lot of people aren't comfortable in, that aren't familiar in. There are sometimes crime in the neighborhoods I go to, in the neighborhoods I grew up in. And I need a concealed carry permit for that. I mean, I didn't have to do that. I have a concealed carry permit, but I didn't have to do that. So those types of provisions are okay. Supreme Court invalidated 7 states' laws based on that. A couple days later, they gutted the only basis that a criminal defendant has based on Miranda to sue an officer and recover when the abuse of the officer's abuse or failure to properly Mirandize somebody leads to a conviction. The only remedy was a civil remedy. Can't do that anymore. Supreme Court took that ability away.
Wow.
Also, the Supreme Court yesterday said that it's okay for a football coach. And here's the other part too. This is the first time that I've noticed this very intentionally in a Supreme Court opinion. I'm sure it's not the first time it's happened, but the actual facts that were in the record do not match up with Justice Gorsuch's opinion in the case that just came out. I believe it was yesterday, and I can't remember the name of it. It's about a football coach kneeling on the 50-yard line after a game. And I was literally a football coach last year, right? I was a head football coach in high school last year. If I do something, if I do anything, and anybody thinks for a second that those kids don't think that has something to do with their playing time, every single high school kid is going to do nearly whatever the coach wants, because you never want to be outside of the coach's good graces.
Correct.
They basically eliminated establishment clause cases for all intents and purposes. Like, these are major, major doctrinal shifts in multiple areas of law in 2 weeks.
Now, getting back to the premise of this is that the ripples that this is going to go and have, and the possible directions. Everything you said, and we have a conservative Supreme Court, and we are probably going to have one for the next 10, 12 years. I mean, we just old people, but I mean, for the next 10, 12 years, the face of it is not going to go ahead and change dramatically. So the direction we have is going to a certain path. And it appears as if there are certain liberal values that are going to be in their path. Civil rights, LGBT rights, the same thing we have been talked about. Is there a game plan they have? Is this a strategic attack on non-conservative values?
This
Your opinion on
is,
that?
yeah. So here's what I think. Here is sort of and this is not an attack on anybody who happens to be a Republican, right? It's just not. Republicans in general, the conservative legal movement specifically, have a very long plan. It's the same way where they talk about sort of as nations, like Americans think in years, whereas when they talk about like Chinese, they think in decades and centuries.
Right. Yes.
They think through how long this may take, but we're going to do it because it's going to be the best thing in 100 years. Well, in politics, and I mean, listen, I ran as, I mean, I would argue the most progressive sheriff candidate probably in the country.
Probably so.
Yeah, I listen, I looked, and I didn't find anybody more progressive. Okay.
I agree. I was involved in that campaign with somebody who was running against you, but you definitely went ahead and and your stance, you were true to your values. You said, this is my belief system, and you backed it up, and right, wrong, or different, this is what I am, this is who I am, this is what I represent. And I respected the hell out of you about that. You have always been what you've been. Other candidates, they had kind of waffled and changed, and they had flip-flopped, whatever the case may be. I don't want to get into specifics, but you have been consistent all the way through. So props on that.
I appreciate that. For the views, okay? So like long-term thinking versus short-term thinking. The only way right now, and here's what I actually think this opinion does, right? It forces people to make a decision about how and where they want to live, right? Which is what it's going to do, is it's going to push people who are blue to blue areas, people who are red to red areas. And there will be no more purple districts like that sort of Orange County, Seminole County area, right? Like there's not going to be very many more of those.
You don't think so? Actually, because I mean, I'm talking to some
I disagree on
very
that.
conservative women, and it can, you know, that all Republicans, but I have some that are like, I can't stand by my party if they're backing this. I have also some women that are saying this is what needs to be, and they consider it a return to values. So you don't see this. I personally feel this could be a huge mistake for the Republican Party down the road, because it might force people. There are gay Republicans. There are conservative women Republicans. There are women Republicans that are like, this has pissed me off. And in trying to do what I've watched, let's make a rule so I get my way. You know, they could have done something that reverberates for many years now, because what happens when they are no longer the majority?
So I will say this. I've worked in politics long enough. I have seen outrage from the right about, oh, our candidate is this or our candidate is that. Or, for example, when Governor DeSantis, 12 hours after becoming his party's nominee, said, let's not monkey this up. And I saw Republicans like, that was racist. That is insensitive. I can't believe it. But you bet your bottom dollar they voted for him. Like, Republicans act outraged a lot of the time, and they may genuinely not agree with something. But Republicans, and this is the reason why Republicans win in the state of Florida, and why when a Republican wins nationally, they win. It's because white women vote Republican more often than they don't.
And
like
this, and that's, I know, I think this is going to become a political, obviously, this will be hugely political in the midterms. And I think the midterms, the right's probably going to go ahead and carry the cycle anyway. But I think during the next national campaign, I think you're going to have a lot of women who are going to rally and who are going to go ahead and rally against the right-wing base because of this. Now, white men, they aren't going to go ahead and care because it does not impact them. People vote for issues that actually impact them. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, most of the African-American community vote Democrat anyway. What this is going to sway are going to be the female voters, because the female voters realize that this has potential to be a direct attack on them. And if you read the comments, you'll see we have some who are actually screaming about this.
I think, Bruce, I honestly think there are people like me that, what's the term you used? Centrists. I'm a registered Republican, but you know me, I'll take, it's whatever party line is speaking to me. And I think this is one of the reasons that you're seeing that happen, is people are no longer voting for somebody, they're voting against somebody.
So,
and I was ready to bail on my party. What's that?
Let Andrew speak.
Yeah, I was in the state of Florida.
Let me see what happened. Can you hear me, Andrew?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Bruce, we can't hear you. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. That was me. All right. So
in the state of Florida.
Yeah. So in the state of Florida, Republicans tend to vote against stuff. We don't want this. We don't want that. Whether it's immigration, there's any number of issues. Democrats, and a lot of times and listen, I'm a registered Democrat. I don't think that's a secret to anybody here, right? The reason Democrats oftentimes don't go out and vote is because we want to vote for something, right? We want somebody to interest us, to excite us, to show us the things that we hold near and dear. But also, the Democratic Party is a much bigger tent generally than the Republican Party.
Yes.
It's a lot harder to get the diversity of opinion, of background, of ethnicity, of sexual preference. There's so many different groups of people under the Democratic Party's tent that even those that are moderate, where do you go? Right? Like what is from probably 2012 to 2016 was probably the biggest growth in the Libertarian Party. You had the candidate, former governor of New Mexico, Gary Johnson, who ran in 2012 and 2016. The sort of libertarian stance, right? Of, we're fiscally conservative, but socially liberal, right? Like that sounds good on paper, but like those ideas don't actually go together, right? Because one has to take precedent over the other. And I had a really good conversation today with a former intern of mine who was incredibly smart, freaking brilliant. Like at 18 years old, was 2 years into college, like brilliant. And she said that, listen, a lot of times women run for office as Democrats and they're held to such a high standard that, and I mean, I've heard a lot recently of, those that didn't vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016. She told you, right? Like she told everybody this was coming. And I find it hard to argue with that. I get it. Like vote for whatever you want, but she said it was coming. And it's we're in a spot in 2022 where I don't actually know what the way back is. And what I mean is what the way back to these conversations, right? Like
Right.
it's fine for, us to sit here and talk about different things. And if we ever did get into the nuance of Roe, right? Like at the end of the day, we're three dudes talking about abortion, right? Like
Actually, no. We're three dudes talking about the ruling, and we're trying to talk about everything else but the fetus aspect of it. So,
yeah,
and if y'all don't mind, real quick, Michael came in, and he's a little bit late, but that's okay. Michael, if you go back and rewatch it, we talked about this is actually about a term they call substantive rights, it's substantive rights, however you say it. Okay. Yep. And to oversimplify it, turning the decision back over to the states means that any law that a state fell under because of the decision of Roe can now be questioned whether, if they were fighting for the right for you to own cats, the amount of cats that you want to own, because it's your substantive right under Roe, the state can now challenge that and take that right away from you. So, and so it goes beyond that. And that's what Bruce and I are trying and have asked for Mr. Darling here to come in and help us understand, because this is going to be far more reaching, Hit the like button, hit the subscribe. I got people hitting the heart button. Thank you. But ring the bell so you get notifications. So, and here's another thing I want to ask, or Bruce, I'm going to go over to you because I get started and I get like, so I'm trying to make sure I don't overrun everybody. I know I can do that. But go ahead, because I got one more point, and then Andrew, Attorney Darling, however, with respect, we're going to talk about this as two dudes with a computer. You are more than welcome to stay, or you might be like, no. Thank you. But we welcome your input, but we can get a little nuts. Go ahead, Bruce.
So I've asked the question a couple times, and I want to come back to this because this was the whole premise of it. The roadmap toward, I see this being an attack on women's rights, gay rights, civil rights. I mentioned that a couple times. Is the sky falling? When I'm saying I'm seeing that, am I just panicking, or is that an actual real concern?
Yeah. So in Florida, maybe, right? Like, and so here's the genuine legal answer to just about everything, right? It depends. I mean, it's such a terrible answer, but
which it is.
If you think about this, so Dobbs is a case out of Mississippi, which provides, I believe it's a 6-week abortion ban. Well, Texas also had SB 8, which went into effect and SB 8 is basically, I don't want to call it a bounty hunter law, but that's really what it is. They took away, generally when you challenge a law, you have to challenge the actor, right? So normally that's the state. The state is implementing some type of law. Well, in Texas, the SB 8, it's anybody with any knowledge can bring forth claims with civil attorney's fees, fines up to $10,000, or $10,000 is the minimum if somebody aids, abets, assists, or performs an abortion. It's like, what does that mean? Does that mean your Uber driver who took you to the clinic?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, exactly. And I once we followed this about national progression of it, I do have a question about the Texas trigger law. But I want to get back to that in a second.
So here's what it's going to determine. Here's what's going to determine whether the sky is falling in your state. Okay, it's going to determine on who's in charge of your state house, how badly gerrymandered your state is, because most states, and listen, like as much as I love to talk trash when Republicans do stuff like they have here in the state of Florida, so that the majority of people can't actually win a majority of House representatives or Senate representatives, that happens in Democratic states too, right? So states where you have a Democratic majority, it's the same thing, which I don't think is right in either instance. I like to try to be at least ideologically pure when I have a problem with something, right? Like if it's something you're doing and I don't like it, I'm not going to also do it because it's just as wrong, right? But I think in the state of Florida particularly, I think that there are going to be, listen, we have some folks from the Panhandle and even from slightly west of here that can be a little bit out there, even for Republicans. Like there are Republicans that look at like, I don't know about this guy, right? So I do see certain bills getting to committee and maybe not making it out of committee, but they're going to be reported on as if they're going to get voted on by the whole House. And it's going to scare the hell out of people. And that's like Orange County Public Schools just put out something about the parental rights and education bill, what folks on the left call the Don't Say Gay bill. OCPS just put out a position that teachers can no longer wear the rainbow ribbons in class because they don't know if that's going to be a violation of that law. So it's not whether we think the law itself is going to actually essentially let the sky fall. What it is it's that fear that it creates in people. It's the uncertainty that it creates in people that they are frozen from action. They're not willing to take action because they're scared of the risks. And listen, gas is $4.50 a gallon. Rent is stupid right now. Interest rates are going up. People aren't trying to do anything right now that's going to potentially get them in trouble.
That's true.
The media is going to latch on to, and I'll name names. Getz, Sabatini, those guys. The media is going to latch on to their crazy because that's going to fill airtime, and that's going to go and have people watching them and buying airtime. But I think most local politicians are actually there to make a difference. Most local politicians want to go ahead and do the right thing, and they're not that level of crazy out there. But when you get into governor stuff, and I'm not even talking about DeSantis, let's talk about Texas, Abbott, and their trigger law they have out there. So I understand their trigger law says that if once the Supreme Court ruling became final, if they leave the state and have an abortion.
I have a question about this.
If they come back, correct me, but if they come back, they can be found or they can be accused of murder.
There are a lot of cases that talk about interstate commerce, which is essentially what that is. You are free to travel, free to associate. These are some of those are First Amendment rights. Your freedom of expression, freedom to associate, freedom of travel, freedom of movement. So that same sort of thinking, you're allowed to go to other states for whatever. So what they're talking about, and this is why if you read anything about people posting for women to delete their period tracking apps, right? Because if you're using a period tracking app and for 90 days you don't have a period, then you traveled outside of the state, then you came back, and 30 days later you had a period. Is that competent, substantial evidence to show that you committed a crime? Is your cell phone GPS data? Did you use GPS to get to a clinic? Did you have to put an address in your Lyft account, your Uber account? Is that subpoenaable? Oh,
but
it is.
Here's my question. And this, especially with 14 years of law enforcement and jurisdictional stuff all the time. Okay. I told Bruce, he and I are going on a cruise in end of July. Okay. Together. I get him over into Jamaica. Okay. Club him in the back of the head. All right. and come home. All right. The state of Florida has no jurisdiction in that case at all. And that's an out and out first degree capital murder. They are immediately going to defer to, hey, you went on a boat that was flagship for another country and you're in another country. Not us, baby. You know, we hear that all the time because people have to hire private investigators to go find out what happened in another country. Same way with murder across the state line. Let's not even take it out of the country. You know, if me and my wife drive into Georgia and she kills me, she comes home, Florida's going to say, yes, you crossed state line, but it's going to be up to Georgia to investigate and charge. And Florida has no right to charge her under that. Wouldn't this be the same thing? It's all hot air, but the problem is it'll take somebody to invest the money in appealing it before it goes away.
So to bring Rob's tirade down to a question for you, which there was a question in there.
Yeah, I just asked it, so shut up.
If someone from Texas goes to Nevada and has an abortion, is the Texas law that says if you do that, you are guilty of murder or whatever, is that actually enforceable?
It is until it gets challenged. And that's the problem, right? Is without getting too like, I am a criminal defense attorney, right? Like this is what I do for a living and I absolutely
it costs money to appeal.
It does. What I will say is there's so many nuances in all of those questions, right? So it's like there are different parts of the law that talk about you have personal jurisdiction, which is like the person in the place. So like if you got pregnant in Texas, but you left Texas and you stayed in another state, would Texas have any ability, because the act took place in Texas, to still have authority over you?
Ah, okay.
Conception took place in Texas, right?
Like divorce laws, a lot of people, Florida's the exception. We don't care where you got married. Come in here, we'll get you divorced.
We'll divorce you quick.
Yeah, quick. You ain't even got to have a reason. You don't like each other. You're just done.
Reconcilable differences.
It's
have
easy.
a good day.
So all my listeners, if you want a divorce, come on down. Okay. Florida's a great place to make a divorce happen. You don't see that on too many billboards next to an orange, you know?
No, so the interesting part, like when we start to get into those trigger laws and that interstate stuff, right? The interstate commerce. So like the question is, if you have abortion drugs that make it like not a Plan B pill, but like the actual drugs for the abortion, right?
Right.
What if they're flown into Atlanta, which is a huge international airport? What if they're flown there and put on a truck? That truck drives through Texas to Nevada, and somebody not from Nevada gets an abortion in Nevada. Like, is the carrier of those drugs somebody who assisted in the abortion? And is that company or the driver who is liable? And like, these are the things that like most folks that don't do this type of work for a living, right? They don't think about the nuance. They think either abortion good or abortion bad, right? Like that's the extent of the thinking.
Yeah, that's why we're doing this show. That's exactly why we're doing this show.
But it's every single step of the process has layers upon layers upon layers of issues and concerns and nuance that something as settled as Roe was settled for 50 years, you know, as amended essentially in Casey, like that means something. You have 2 generations of women who have grown up knowing that this particular thing is okay. And obviously like we're being very intentional about not talking about right, wrong, who is right, who is not.
Right.
The only thing I would say in sort of framing how people look at this is I have no issues if your genuine religious beliefs are you should never have an abortion, no matter the exception, right? I have no issues with that. Those are your beliefs. That's fine. I have no issues if you want to use abortion as birth control, right? That's your belief. That's your fine. What I have an issue with is somebody imposing their religious belief on literally everybody else. And that is an issue that is actually anti-conservative. That is anti-small government. So it's like the sort of theological portion of this is contrary to the small government portion, right? Like it's not the same. And that's one of the frustrating parts for me is that when you say this Second Amendment is superior to nearly all other amendments and states shall not regulate, well, actually, Heller versus DC said states can regulate. You just can't. You cannot regulate to exclusion. You can't regulate so much that people cannot have firearms.
Right.
Heller was, I think, 2005, 2010. One of those two. That's the first time an individual right to carry guns was determined. So it's like we're adding rights that a particular ideology likes, and we're taking away rights that impact people who predominantly are on the other side of the political spectrum. And it really hurts the legitimacy of the court, not just to do these things, because there are ways to do these that over time are less abrupt, right? They're less, you chip, and this is normally what Chief John Roberts' court has done, is you chip away, you chip away, you chip away. Oh, I guess we've chipped away so much, we're just going to overrule it. There's not enough of it left anyway. But that's not what they did here. They basically said, oh, this history and tradition for the last 50 years, yeah, but before that, it wasn't a thing. So let's go ahead and overrule it. And I think it would be genuinely impossible right now to pass a constitutional amendment for anything.
And you know what? I agree with you. And I don't think people understand how many laws still stand that are truly unconstitutional because there's no profit for an attorney. So if I'm going to appeal rights on anything, it's all money coming out of my pocket. So and unless I get 100 people willing to chip in and pay for this attorney and we do a whole mass thing, nobody's going to challenge some of the child support laws, some of the different things that are happening that make absolutely no sense because it's just too expensive. Judges will make decisions. I listen to it when they're like, this has already been ruled about in case law. Well, I don't agree with case law, so we're going here. Boom. And the only way the judge just said somebody over him overturned, but he's going to keep ruling this way because it's personal belief. So you got to spend thousands of dollars. And our criminal justice system has become not just criminal, the whole judicial system has become wrapped in green, not blue or red, in a dollar bill because to protect your rights costs money.
Let me say this. So this is a particular just pain point for me.
Okay.
There's a municipal city ordinance for the city of Orlando. It's 43.06. And the only reason I know that is because, like I said, I despise this, right? It is disturbing the peace, essentially, is what it works out to. But everything in there, from not the state law about loud music, we could have a whole podcast on that, honestly. But it mentions panhandling and all these different things. So here's how it works in practice, right? Because we talk about the sort of theoretical, but then a lot of folks don't understand how it actually works.
Right.
And I spoke a little more than a year ago against the ordinance that the county was trying to pass, that Sheriff Mina was trying to get Mayor Demings to pass, and Mayor Demings was supporting, and the other county commissioners were kind of looking crazy, the anti-picketing laws. So the reason is, here's how the Orlando Municipal Ordinance 43.06 actually works in practice. Municipal ordinance violations are not crimes, okay? There are two types of crimes in the state of Florida, felonies and misdemeanors. Yep. Now, each of those is incredibly nuanced. Municipal ordinance violations are treated like second-degree misdemeanors. That's what they're treated like. They're not actually crimes. So we have our homeless population, who part of that ordinance, 43.06, used to be camping. Well, you can't camp on sidewalks. It's like, yeah, but I own a house. I could camp in my yard if I wanted. If you don't have a place to live, where are you supposed to sleep, right? And I get it. There are definitely a thousand
Anywhere
things
but here.
Yeah, we could do with our homeless population to help them, right? To get people off the streets. There's numerous things we could do. But the issue is you cannot ever challenge the constitutionality of the ordinance, because if somebody gets arrested for it, goes to Orange County Jail, either stays there the night, can't get out because they can't afford bond, or they actually get to court and they say, let's set it for trial, the city immediately dismisses it because they know it won't stand up to any scrutiny. So they dismiss it and somebody gets arrested for the same thing that day.
Right.
And it's
that's beat the rap, but you may beat the rap, but you won't beat the ride. And that's a scary statement that too many of our law enforcement officers live by. It's one of the reasons I left.
So Andrew, we know we had said an hour of your time, but before we go, I do want to go ahead and give me a sales pitch. Talk to me about darlinglaw.com. Tell me about what you do, how they can reach you. Tell us about you and what you do.
Yeah, so I am an Orange County native, right? I am an Oak Ridge High School graduate. This is home for me. So I grew up on like Orange Blossom Trail in Americana, right? So I grew up in one of the neighborhoods that people are like, oh, don't go there. What do you mean don't go there, right? Like that's home for me. So when I see folks when I worked at the public defender's office here in Orange County, I was literally representing people from the neighborhood I grew up in, right? I'm from here. This is my home. I care deeply about Orlando, about Central Florida. I'm starting to care more about Winter Garden as I live out here now, out here in Horizon West. But listen, like I love Orange County. This is my home. This is where I'm from. I do predominantly criminal defense work. I occasionally do some personal injury, which I hate doing, but I'll do it for family and friends. I do some civil rights work. So if you have an excessive use of force case, if you have somebody who's been injured by law enforcement, I take those cases because they're very hard cases to win. There's not a lot of money in them, but I care about the results. I care about the outcome. So my website is pretty easy to get to. It's andrewdarlinglaw.com. You can find me on all the social medias at Attorney Darling. You can find me also at Andrew Darling Law on pretty much everything. You'll get to see some of the types of cases I've had dismissed. I actually went out to what we would call rural Pasco County last month and won a trial for my client on a battery on a law enforcement officer and resisting without violence because it didn't happen. So sometimes you have folks that work for an organization, and a lot of times, unfortunately, those organizations are supposed to be law enforcement organizations that are not following the law. And when they're not following the law, it calls into question the entirety of the system. So in the same way that our discussion today talked about how the highest court in the land is upending what we thought was settled law and what, honestly, law enforcement uses to make decisions, what state attorneys, what attorneys generals for states, all of this settled law is no longer settled. So what I do is I help my clients to get the best outcome that they can get in a criminal case, right? So if you're accused of something, the first thing I would tell you, don't make a statement. If you ask, and Reverend Rob, let me ask you this. You're a former law enforcement. You're a former law enforcement. If you were questioned about anything, whether you thought you were a suspect or not, are you going to answer questions?
Hell no. Shut the F up. It is.
So that's part of
I get pissed. Now you get me on the thing. We got to have you back and let's talk about. I would love to talk about and from 14 years of law enforcement here in the state of Florida. I'm a Florida resident, native. I'm actually a fourth generation native.
Nice.
So, and my kids were born here. So I'd love to talk this with you because I get very heated because it's embarrassing what law enforcement is doing and what our judicial system has become because it's not what it was supposed to be.
It's not.
So yeah, would you come back and let us have that discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, there are very few things in life that are more motivating to me than criminal justice reform. right? Like that's
right.
my jam. That is the entirety of
jam.
and you know, Bruce was talking about this earlier. Like my campaign for sheriff, right? I fundamentally believe the place that the criminal justice system is broken is the intake process.
Yeah.
And that comes through law enforcement every single time. It's not progressive prosecutors. It's not empathetic judges. It's not appeals courts, Supreme Courts, anywhere, right? It's law enforcement. If you fix the issues with law enforcement, you fix the problems in the system. If you talk about it from like a data analytics standpoint, right? Bad data in, bad data out. Right? There's no way to get good data if you have bad data that goes into the system. And that's the problem right now, is the part of our system that's broken is the part OBT in Lancaster. It's funny. I used to live in Lancaster Villas, which is right down the street from right on Lancaster and Weingard.
That's where I live at.
Yeah, that's where I used to walk to Oak Ridge High School my freshman and sophomore year before I moved to down on Americana in Point Vista.
Yeah.
So listen, like when I tell you guys, like I'm down to have another conversation. I mean, this is what I do, and okay. I absolutely love when I can go to a state attorney and be like, listen, watch this 30 seconds of the body cam. We're going to either set it for trial or you can go ahead and dismiss it. It's up to you. And they file a dismissal. So it's like law enforcement has such a critical role that if you fix law enforcement, you fix the system. And like, that's not an oversimplification, right? Like there are problems in the system. But if you fix law enforcement, because reasonable suspicion, right, to pull somebody over, probable cause to arrest.
And Florida doesn't even have suspicion. I'll shut up. Okay. I'll kick back, finish. I'm sorry. Don't get me started.
But listen, if you have a pending case, if you and even if you're a witness in the case, even if you're a victim in the case, and you just want to talk to an attorney, right? And say, hey, listen, I don't know that I need an attorney for anything. I just have a question. Go to my website. I have a quick intake form. I mean, it's literally name, phone number, email. What's your issue? That's it. That's the whole thing.
And everybody down below in the description is Mr. Darling's email, the website, TikTok, everything you need to get hold of this man is right there. So please check it out down below.
Yep. And gentlemen, listen, thank you again for having me. I'm going to go spend time with my 2-day-old daughter.
Good luck with that baby, man. And I'm going to go ahead and reach out to you probably about a month, 6 weeks. We'll probably do this thing again, man.
All right, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much.
Mr. Darling, thank you again, sir.
Have a great day. Yeah, take care.
Bye-bye. Mr. Bruce.
I enjoyed that, man.
That was great. I look forward to having him back on in the future, especially let's talking about, the criminal justice system, which is near and dear to my heart. So with all that being said, what do you think?
Take what you want.
Leave what you don't. But leave with some people.
Go with the smile.
All right, everybody. Y'all have a great evening. Thank you for being here. Reverend Rob and Mr. Bruce, we are out of here. Have a good evening.